How leaders manipulate minds before starting a war is the real story behind the USA Venezuela conflict. What if I told you that long before weapons, sanctions, or threats appear, psychological warfare has already decided what millions of people will fear, support, and ignore? If this conflict feels confusing, emotionally charged, or strangely one-sided, it's not accidental, it's psychological design. Stay with me, because once you see how this works, you won't be able to unsee it. Phase 1. The illusion people believe. Most people believe the tension between the USA and Venezuela is mainly about power, resources, or politics. That's the surface explanation. It feels logical. It feels familiar. But surface explanations exist for one reason: to keep deeper mechanisms invisible. Because before war becomes physical, it becomes psychological. Before soldiers move, minds are prepared. Before force is justified, emotion is activated. This is how conflicts become acceptable to people who will never experience them directly. Not through facts, but through feeling. Fear, pride, anger, moral certainty. These emotions don't appear randomly. They are introduced, reinforced, and normalized over time. And here's something important most people never realize. You don't need to live in the USA or Venezuela to be influenced by this conflict. Narratives travel faster than armies. Emotion spreads faster than truth. Here's the part most people miss. By the time a conflict feels necessary, public perception has already been shaped. Not accidentally, deliberately. Phase 2. The dark psychology behind war. This is where dark psychology enters the picture. Not conspiracy, not secret rooms or hidden cables, but predictable patterns of how the human brain reacts under pressure. Once you understand these patterns, modern conflicts start to look disturbingly similar. Let's break them down. Tactic 1. Fear amplification. Fear is always the first weapon. In the USA-Venezuela situation, fear appears in different forms depending on the audience. Economic collapse, national security threats, instability, danger. These ideas are repeated until they feel urgent. And urgency changes how the brain works. Psychologically, fear shuts down critical thinking. The brain enters survival mode. When humans feel threatened, they don't search for truth. They search for authority. This is why propaganda works best during crisis. Fear narrows attention. It simplifies thinking. It makes questioning feel risky. This affects you because once fear is active, logic feels slow and unsafe. Emotion feels faster. And speed always favors manipulation. Tactic 2. Us versus them. Conditioning. Once fear is activated, division follows naturally. One side is framed as rational, defensive, and justified. The other is framed as dangerous, corrupt, or irrational. This is classic mass conditioning psychology. The human brain craves simple stories under stress. Good versus bad. Safe versus dangerous. Us versus them. Nuance disappears. Complexity becomes exhausting. And once identity becomes attached to a narrative, disagreement stops being intellectual. It becomes personal. This affects you because once you emotionally choose a side, facts become optional. Information is filtered through loyalty instead of logic. Tactic 3. Moral framing and justification. No population wants to feel immoral. So actions are framed as protection, defense, prevention, necessity. Language is carefully chosen to make opposition feel irresponsible, even dangerous. This is psychological manipulation at its most subtle. Because people stop asking, "Is this true?" and start asking, "Why wouldn't we support this?" Moral framing replaces analysis. And once morality is attached, doubt feels like betrayal. This is how psychological warfare wins without force. Tactic 4. Repetition and normalization. Messages are repeated until they feel familiar, and familiarity feels like truth. The same talking points appear again and again. In media, in speeches, in everyday conversation. Over time, resistance weakens, not because people are unintelligent, but because the brain interprets repetition as reliability. This is not accidental. Repetition rewires perception. And this affects you because once an idea feels normal, questioning it feels unnecessary. Phase 3. Real patterns in the USA-Venezuela conflict. When you step back, the USA-Venezuela conflict follows a psychological pattern seen throughout history. Different messages are sent to different audiences. Fear for some, pride for others, security for one group, threat for another. Each side emphasizes emotional response over complex reality, because emotion mobilizes faster than truth. This isn't about who is right or wrong. It's about how human psychology is influenced during conflict. Once you see the pattern, it becomes disturbingly predictable. And predictability is power for those who understand it. Phase 4. Escalation. Why this is dangerous. Here's where it becomes dangerous. When people don't recognize manipulation, they lose autonomy. They defend narratives they never fully examined. They repeat talking points they didn't choose. They feel emotions they didn't originate. Emotional manipulation replaces independent thought, and blind obedience feels voluntary. This is how conflicts escalate without resistance. Not because people are weak, but because psychology is powerful. The greatest threat isn't war itself. It's minds being controlled before decisions are made. Once belief is shaped, force becomes optional. Phase 5. The deeper layer most people miss. Here's the layer most people never reach. Psychological manipulation doesn't end once a narrative is accepted. It evolves. Once fear and identity are established, silence becomes powerful. Questions stop being asked. Doubt becomes socially uncomfortable. People begin policing themselves and others without being told to. This is one of the most effective forms of control, because when people believe they are thinking freely, resistance disappears. In conflicts like the USA-Venezuela situation, attention is carefully guided. Some stories are amplified. Others quietly disappear. Not through force, but through focus. What you pay attention to shapes what you believe matters. And what you ignore slowly stops existing in your mind. Manipulation doesn't require agreement. It only requires distraction. Phase 6. Defense and awareness. How to protect your mind. So how do you protect yourself? Not through anger, not through denial, but through awareness. First, watch emotional language. Fear-heavy messaging is rarely neutral. Second question, urgency. Manipulation always demands fast agreement. Third, ask one simple question. Who benefits if I stop thinking and start reacting? Awareness slows the process. And slowing down breaks manipulation. This isn't about choosing sides. It's about reclaiming your ability to think. The USA-Venezuela conflict is more than a political issue. It's a psychological case study. War doesn't begin with weapons. It begins when people stop questioning and start believing. Most people are never taught this because awareness breaks control. And once you see how manipulation works, you stop being an easy target. And that, more than any weapon, is real power.